Welcome to my channel. Listen.
Smart baby.
Once upon a time, our country needed talented people to help the country. The mandarins in the court were already old and had little strength left. The king sent an official to scout around the country to find talented people, good at taking care of state affairs with the king. The official has traveled everywhere. His horse has traveled too much and has become thin, but he still hasn't found the right person. Wherever he went, he posed difficult riddles to find talented people, but no one could solve his riddles. One day, the mandarin was passing through a village field. His horse was tired from walking for a long time. He sat down to rest on the side of the road to let the horse eat some grass. Seeing a father and son working in the fields, the skinny father was plowing a buffalo, and the son, about 7 to 8 years old, was pounding the ground. He then asked,
"Hey there, man. How many miles can his buffalo plow in a day?"
The father was confused and didn't know how to answer the mandarin properly, but his son quickly said,
"Let me ask you first, if you can answer how many steps your horse can walk in a day, I will tell you how many roads our buffalo can plow in a day."
When the mandarin heard the boy's response, he was very surprised. He was confused and didn't know what to do. In his heart, the mandarin whispered happily,
"Surely this boy will grow up to be a talented person. I don't have to look for anything else again."
Then the mandarin asked the names of the father and son's hometown and then rode all the way back to the king. Seeing the mandarin excitedly return, saying that he had found a talented person, he was very happy. But to know if he was really smart, he ordered someone to bring 3 baskets of sticky rice and 3 male buffaloes to that village, ordering 5 afterwards. The village had to raise those 3 buffaloes to give birth to 9 children. If you do not pay enough, the village will have to pay the penalty. When the villagers heard the king's edict, they were a little happy but worried a lot. They were happy because the king also paid attention to the village and would surely receive support in the future, but how could those 3 male buffaloes give birth to 9 female buffaloes? No matter how many village meetings were held, how many opinions were still unable to resolve the problem the king had given, the village had never been so hasty and searching. Everyone thought it was a disaster that was about to happen. The work comes to the child's ear, the plowman. He immediately told his father,
"Father, it's not often that you receive a fortune from the king. You just tell the village to slaughter 2 buffaloes and prepare 2 baskets of sticky rice so that everyone can eat to their heart's content. As for 1 buffalo and 1 basket of rice, we will ask the village to sell it as a fee for my father and son to go on a pilgrimage."
If you dare to eat the buffalo, if you dare to eat meat, it won't be a year, but tomorrow the whole village will have to suffer the crime too, son. Don't be foolish.
The boy smiled and affirmed,
"Dad, just believe in me, I know how to take care of myself, it's all over."
The father listened to his son and went to the temple to meet the village elders to present the story. When they heard the father say that, the whole village was still very suspicious, so they forced father and son to make a commitment letter. If father and son do it, then they will sit down to eat. A few days later, father and son packed their things and made their way to the capital. Arriving at the palace, the son told the father to stay outside and wait for the news of victory. When the guards were careless, he quickly sneaked inside and cried loudly. Hearing the sound of a child crying, the king sent his soldiers to bring the boy in to ask what happened. The king asked,
Little boy, what happened to you that made you come to my yard and cry so loudly?
The boy replied,
Dear king, my mother passed away early. The whole family only has me and my father. But my father refused to have a baby so I could have someone to play with. That's why I cried. I hope the king will issue an order to force my father to give birth to a baby for you.
Hearing the boy say that, both the king and the nobles all laughed and laughed. King continued,
If you want to have a baby to play with, you must ask your father to marry another wife. But your father is a male, how can you give birth?
The boy suddenly brightened and said,
Then why did the king order my village to raise 3 male buffaloes and force them to give birth to 9 buffaloes to give to you? Male buffaloes are male, so how can they give birth?
The king smiled and said,
That's just me testing your intelligence. But doesn't the whole village know how to bring those 3 buffaloes to eat and celebrate together?
The boy said,
Dear king, after our village received the buffalo and sticky rice, knowing that this was a blessing from the king, the whole village made a feast together to celebrate.
The king had to admit that the mandarin sent to look for talented people was right. This boy was very intelligent. But the king still wanted to challenge the boy one more time. The next day, while the boy and his father were eating at the public restaurant, suddenly a king's envoy brought a sparrow and said, The king ordered father and son to kill this sparrow and prepare it into 3 dishes. The quick-witted boy told his father to take out a sewing needle and said to the messenger,
He took this needle back and told the king that we would like to ask the king to let this needle be forged into a knife so that we can cut birds.
After the envoy returned to report to the king was completely impressed with the boy's intelligence. Immediately the king called father and son to the palace and gave them a very generous reward. Back then, the neighboring country always plotted to invade our country. To find out if there was any talent on this side, they sent messengers and brought with them a very funny puzzle. How do I pass a thin thread through a hollow double-ended spiral? After hearing the envoy talk about the purpose of this visit, all the kings and officials looked at each other. If you can't answer that puzzle, you will be inferior and inferior to the neighboring country, proving that the country has no talented people. The great gods scratched their heads thinking, some people tried to use their mouths to suck the thread through, some people applied wax to the thread to make it easier to thread, etc. But all the above methods were useless. Many officials were helpless. In the end, to have more time to send someone to ask the smart boy, the king thought of a way to invite the emissary to take a break in the shop for a day to relieve fatigue from the long distance. An official rode his horse carrying the king's edict to the smart boy's house. At that moment, he and his friends were playing around behind the house. After hearing the official explain the riddle of the neighboring country's messenger, the boy did not give an answer, but only sang a song.
Morning is morning. Morning personality. Catch the ant and tie it around the waist. At that time, I used paper to carry. At the time of applying grease, the ants welcomed the new arrival. Morning, morning.
Then the boy said,
I don't have to go back to court with you. Just follow my song and the thread will immediately pass through the snail.
The mandarin happily rode back to court to report to the king. The king and his courtiers seemed to be saved from a clearly losing move. Indeed, the ant managed to thread the thread through the snail's intestine before the surprised eyes of the neighboring country's messenger. Since that time, the king has appointed the boy as a poinsettia, sent someone to build a separate mansion for the boy near the palace to facilitate inquiries when needed. Thank you for watching my video. Subscribe to the channel to learn more useful knowledge.